it's getting spooky. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now for today's video, I'm going to be doing a romance reader tries the horror genre and slash thrillers genre. If you guys didn't know, this week from August 24th to I believe August 30th is the Summerween readathon hosted by Gabby Reads and Olivia Reads a Latte here on BookTube. Now I've been a fan of Gabby's videos for a very long time, ever since she was talking a lot about her thrillers and she was doing her wrap-ups and her hauls. I'm always a fan of her reading vlogs as well, and thrillers is definitely a genre that is not as represented here on BookTube as I would have imagined. I always think that like romance is probably one of the biggest genres in the publishing industry, and while romance performs really well, if you take a look at the statistics and you take a look at like what people are actually buying, it's usually thrillers and mystery and suspense and those types of books that do really well in the market and that actually makes a lot of money. So definitely go check out her channel if you guys are enjoying thrillers and if you guys enjoying horror books, because she reads a lot of them. And then for Olivia, I recently started watching. I don't think she created her BookTube as long as Gabby, and I think she's like relatively new, but she's so sweet. Her aesthetic is amazing. I really like her fall aesthetic. I really like her colorful bright shelves that she always features in the backgrounds of her videos, and her reading vlogs are fantastic. It has a lot of aesthetic shots. So if you guys are into very calm and soothing reading vlogs mixed with very dry and sarcastic humor that catches you off guard, definitely go check out Olivia. So these two beautiful people have basically created a readathon that is dedicated to the genres that they both very much love, which is thrillers and also horror. So as you can tell from the readathon name, it's supposed to be celebrating Halloween in the summertime. So you're supposed to read as much like scary books as possible. And I personally love Halloween. Like I love watching Halloween movies, and I love like going out sometimes at night, dressing up and seeing the children dress up and having fun. And I just really wanted to take part in this readathon, especially because I don't normally take part of readathons. So for this readathon, I actually ended up reading 5 books. The day that I'm filming this right now, the readathon hasn't actually ended yet, but I decided to cut it short because I'm a mood reader and I was very much in the mood to read horror novels and to read thrillers, but then I kind of quickly died and faded on as the week progressed. So I read 5 books in 5 days, and I think that's good enough for this readathon. And I thought that I'll just do a quick wrap up of all the horror novels that I read, while also giving you kind of like a taste of like what it would be like if you're normally a romance reader who is trying a different genre like thrillers and horror novels. So if you guys are new to my channel, I have this ongoing series where it's romance reader tries a new genre, you know, just a video where I'm forcing myself or I'm pushing myself outside of my normal comfort zone and reading genres that I normally typically don't pick up. So this is actually also a different angle that I'm showing you guys right now, mostly because my sister took my tripod, so I have to adjust my other tripod, and my other tripod is very tall. So then I thought that I'll just give you kind of like another view that nobody really sees in my videos, which is my 3 shelves. And these 3 shelves are actually packed with romance. So these are my romance shelves where I dedicate them to historical romance, like here in the back, and also contemporary romance. And these are also my mass paperback copies. So hopefully you guys enjoy the view. So overall for this readathon, I think I did pretty well for the number of books that I read, but overall I think I didn't pick out the best books to read, and I didn't do enough research on the books that were going to give me a higher rating or basically change my perspective for the genre. I think overall right now, I really appreciate the horror genre. Horror genre is definitely that I normally typically don't pick up because horror is kind of gore, it includes monsters, it's kind of paranormal in some way. It's basically meant to disgust you and to make you feel uncomfortable most of the times. And it's not like it's a bad thing. I actually really appreciate the horror genre, as I read some some books later on that I will tell you about, and I really did enjoy it, but it's just that I didn't pick the best of the best in the horror genre. So it kind of still makes me feel that horror is going to be on my back burner, and I'm not going to be leaning towards it very soon. But with all that being said, let's get started on the books that I did read. So starting for the first book that I did read for this readathon, which was on Monday, was Have You Seen Me by Kate White. Now this novel is actually a thriller slash suspense novel. It's about a girl who basically starts off her day normally. It's pouring rain outside. She has her coffee, but she's soaking wet because she doesn't know where her umbrella is, and she heads to work. She's a financial journalist, which basically means that she knows a lot about businesses and she knows a lot about investigating businesses to report on how they are doing. She shows up to her newspaper company for her job, and she realizes that she doesn't have her work badge, so she can't get into the building. So she kind of just sits in the lobby soaking wet, waiting for a familiar face so that they can let her in. And when she finally does spot her boss for like a lot of years now, she is shocked when her boss asks her what she's doing here, and she hasn't been at the firm for like over 5 years now, meaning she quit her job and she's left, but for some reason her memories are all jumbled and she thinks that she still works at the firm. Right now she is scared and she is forgetful of a lot of things, so she goes to a therapist and she tries to piece together what has happened and who the people in her lives she can trust. For example, her husband is kind of like leaving at different times. Her husband seems kind of untrustworthy. He's doing things that he normally typically doesn't do. Or for example, she also is doing things that she doesn't even remember doing. Sometimes she puts things down in one room and it shows up in a different room. And so we have a lot of unreliable narrators and also a very unreliable character base. For this book, I was definitely intrigued by the premise of it because hello, you show up like to your workplace 5 years after you quit your job and claiming that you still have your job, but then you start to realize that, hey, there's like a gap in your memories that you can't remember and you can't unlock, and it's all fuzzy and blurry. So I really like the premise of this novel, and that's what really pulled me in and intrigued me to read it. As I started reading it, I got more and more annoyed by our main female heroine. For some reason, for thrillers and suspense novels, our main heroine or our main hero becomes like a Sherlock Holmes, becomes like a detective that knows all the ways to investigate crime and to basically piece together things and little details, and they catch on very quickly and very fast. For me personally, I feel like that if I left a bracelet on my table and it showed up in the other room, I wouldn't think too much of it. I wouldn't be convinced that, you know, somebody moved my bracelet somewhere else. And then I would just think that I just forgot that I put the bracelet in a different room. But for some reason for her, she manages to remember every little thing that she does. And that's when it started becoming very unbelievable at that point, where she became from an average Joe to a crime-solving detective, able to piece back together everything that she has forgotten. Of course, she does get help along the way. She actually hires a private investigator to help her piece back together her past and to help investigate the people in her life currently to make sure that they are still who they say they are and that they are good people trying to help her. Overall, the book just kind of went downhill for me from like the halfway point, and I just didn't really care about the characters anymore. And also, I kind of figured out who the person was from the very beginning because they sounded very unreliable and it just didn't seem right and it didn't fit right in the other pieces of the story. The ending was also very lackluster. It concluded the story very well, but it also kind of turned into kind of like a woman's fiction novel at the end, which is like great because, you know, feminism and things like that, but also like weird because you guys just kind of changed the whole genre for the last like 100 pages. Kind of doesn't make sense. Overall for this book, I gave this a 1 out of 5 stars. So for the next book that I read, it's not really a novella. It's not really like a short story because it's over 200 pages. And this was actually my second Stephen King book that I have ever read in my whole entire life. The first book that I read from Stephen King was actually Misery after catching the movie late at night on cable television back in the day. I absolutely loved the gore and the suspense of Misery, the movie. So I decided to pick up Misery, the book, to read it. And I thoroughly enjoyed that one. I remember being very creeped out because that was my first horror novel and there was a lot of descriptions of blood. So if you guys have a trigger warning for blood and for horrific scenes, definitely don't check out the horror genre in general. But for this readathon, I decided to pick up my second Stephen King novel, which was The Mist. So The Mist has recently been turned into a TV show, I believe, on HBO, as from the cover of the book that I picked up. And The Mist is basically what happens is that I believe it's kind of like a small town and there is a storm brewing, or a storm that's coming, because there is this thick layer of mist slash fog in the air, but it's different. It doesn't look normal. It's kind of really thick. It's kind of really white and you can't really see through it. It's also like kind of gridded, like it's kind of straight instead of like spreading and fading out like a normal mist does in nature. And the people in the town are getting scared. They're starting to have speculations of to like what is actually happening in the mist, and if you go into the mist, what would happen to you? Will you be able to come back out? And everybody's just kind of having all these speculations. So you're hearing from different voices about like what is actually going on. And then suddenly you have people disappearing into the mist, running off into the mist, never coming back. And then that's when it's revealed that there is actually creatures in the mist that are there to actually kill all the humans. And then that's when we go into a deeper dive into the mystery behind it. Where did these creatures come from? Where did the mist come from? What can the characters do to help resolve the problem so that they can live a normal life? Overall, this book was very creepy in setting. If you listen to the audiobook while there is a thunderstorm outside, definitely you will be worried and you will be scared, because that is what happened to me when I was reading this book at 12 a.m. It was very creepy. I really liked it. But then also towards the midway point and towards the ending, it faded out, it sizzled out. It wasn't as interesting anymore. I kind of got bored. I didn't really care about the characters. And when the truth was revealed about how the mist got there, I was just kind of like, what? And I was kind of very confused. And also the ending, sorry to say, is kind of open-ended, and it's not going to be as satisfying as you think it is. For this book, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So after picking up The Mist, I decided to go with another Stephen King novel, and like the Stephen King novels from before, it's not that long. These are fairly the shorter ones that Stephen King has written, because if we all know Stephen King, his books are at least like 400 pages and above and very thick. I do not have time to read an 800-page book from Stephen King for this readathon, so I decided to go with another shorter books of his, which is called A Good Marriage. And now this book follows a married couple. On the outside, they are perfect and they are deeply in love with each other. They have connected well with each other for many years and they're celebrating kind of like their decade together. But what happens when our female character, our wife, actually goes downstairs to go look for something in the basement and then finds like a mysterious stash of pornography, and that pornography is something that is not like what she expected. It's something that she would never expect her husband to like, and she is trying to balance it with her emotions of like, this is his right to have his own sexual preferences and how his own sexual fetishes and things like that, and while also like he's kind of hiding like a very big secret from me, and it's kind of like nestled in her brain and worming in her brain that something is not like what it seems, and that something is actually wrong with her husband, and that her husband might be different and might be more dangerous than she has ever imagined. And this is kind of like the story of our wife finding out that her husband is actually kind of a killer and that is hurting a lot of females, and that she might be in grave danger if she doesn't help stop the act. And for this one, I really like the suspense of it, because you're kind of like following the lines of the wife and you're trying to like make sense of like what he's actually doing. But at certain times, you also realize that the wife is trying to justify the actions, and she kind of seems like she's kind of rolling along with the punches, but you know that she's clearly not into it, and she's actually going to try to help stop the crimes being committed. For this book, it was good, but then once again, the execution towards the middle and towards the end left me kind of bored, and I was just kind of like, okay, like, where are we going with this? And it kind of had no direction, whatsoever. So for this one, I also gave it an average 3 out of 5 stars. So for this readathon, I actually decided to pick up an author that is actually written a book in full Japanese that has been translated into English. And I've seen this cover going around a lot on fiction Instagram. So like people who post a lot of fiction books as opposed to YA books and romance book accounts that I typically follow. And I really wanted to read it because it was Asian voices, but this book is called The Memory Police by Yoko Agawa. And now this book, it follows this kind of like dystopian world, this science fiction world where there are people that are called the memory police, and they are in charge of erasing anything that the government or that they think that shouldn't be remembered. So when they erase things, they kind of like take the item away, and then they have your DNA, and then they just erase it from your brains so that you have no recollection of like the item that you have. And then sometimes when they have people that they want to get rid of, they actually take away that people and erase it too. And that's when it gets really scary, because we're talking about this dystopian world where someone is controlling what you remember in history, what you're remembering in your life, and so that they can control the narrative in your life and to control the population itself. So this book has been described as kind of like an extension of George Orwell's 1984. So for 1984, I actually read this back in high school when I think like when I was maybe in grade 12 or maybe grade 11, and I absolutely found George Orwell's book kind of really boring. And in 1984 was just kind of like a snore fest to me, as all the books that I read in English class in my high school years, and also in some English classes that I'd taken in university years. But the concept of 1984 is not boring. It's kind of interesting to see how like the government is controlling everything that the population is doing without sounding like a wacko, thinking that the government controls my life, when in reality I still have autonomy and I still have the freedom that I want. But let's not get into the political side of real life and books and fiction. So The Memory Police was interesting in a way because we followed this female character who is trying to protect her boss, and she is trying to hide her boss away from the memory police. And it's about these people that are gathered together to survive and to not show themselves and to not review themselves in front of the memory police, or else they would lose things and they would lose themselves eventually. And it's exciting to read because you see them really struggle to cope with the things that they've lost. You see them trying to remember the things that they see in front of them, because they often keep the items, but they have no recollection of like what the item is or what it does. This book was interesting in a way because it was just you reading about how they live their lives. So I wouldn't call this book a really like a thriller suspense novel, even though they are constantly running away from the memory police. It's more of kind of like a science fiction / fiction novel to read when you're interested in this concept. I really liked it, but it definitely was not my favorite, and overall it kind of fizzled out in the end once again. You kind of already knew where it was going. You kind of already knew that, you know, like they're going to eventually lose the battles. For this one, I also gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. So moving on to the last book that I've read, and also ironically my favorite book that I've read for this readathon, and also like one of the best books. So ironically, it's also one of my favorite books for this readathon, and it should compel me to read more thrillers, because usually if I read one really good book, I will want to continue with the genre and read a next good book in that genre. But I decided to take a break after reading this one because it was just good enough for me. So this book is called Malorie by Josh Malerman, and now this is the most anticipated sequel to the horror / thriller novel Bird Box. And if you guys haven't watched it yet, definitely go watch Bird Box on Netflix. It stars Sandra Bullock. She did an amazing job at acting and Malorie, and she did an amazing job with, I think like she helped direct it or produce it or something. She definitely played a larger role into that production of that Netflix film. But I actually picked out Bird Box to watch while journaling last year, and I remember like thinking it was going to be a spooky movie to watch on the side, but it literally made me stop journaling a lot of the times just to focus a lot on that book. So if you guys haven't heard of Bird Box, or if you guys haven't read the book Bird Box, Bird Box is basically about this dystopian world where there are creatures in the sky. There are creatures flying around, they're lurking. Nobody really knows how they look like, and they cause you to feel emotions that you don't want. They either make you feel joy and that your life is like better and beautiful and now that you can end it, or it makes you feel very sad and depressed and meaningless and it makes you want to end it. So basically these creatures make you want to commit suicide, and unfortunately a lot of people are seeing these creatures and they kill themselves in the process, and now this becomes a problem. So what humans actually do is that they lock up their doors, they close their curtains, they blind them up, and they put blindfolds on so that they don't see these creatures and they don't kill themselves. I actually read Bird Box after I watched the movie, and Bird Box did not disappoint me. The book was very good. It was just as good as the movie, or the movie was just as good as the book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I was very excited to read Malorie without any idea of what Malorie was actually about. Malorie actually takes place like maybe like a decade or so later after it ended with Bird Box, and then now we see the two children that Malorie has taken care of from the first book has grown up to become teenagers. I think they're like around 16 years old now. They are starting to develop their own thoughts and their feelings towards things that they want to combat in the world, such as the monsters, and living in their ordered lives of always wearing a blindfold, always paying attention to their surroundings, and always listening to voices and sounds outside in the nature when they're outside. And you can see that there is a breakdown in the relationships of these characters, because if you read the first book or if you watched the movie, you would know that Malorie is very much in control of the two young children. And it's easy to accept this. As a child, you would always listen to the lessons and words of an adult, thinking that they know best. But what happens when you have teenage rebellion added to it, and this idea that there is a greater world out there if you could just break away from the mold that everybody has taught you, which is wearing a blindfold all the time and always doing all these protective measures. So we see these differences of opinions between Malorie and Tom, which is her son, and you kind of see these relationship breakdowns where everything is kind of being pulled apart with these creatures adding stress in the background. And it's their journey of how Malorie discovers her parents might be still alive but in a different area of the state or a different state, and it's up to her to travel her way there so that she can get to this other place where it's a safe place for humans to live. It's about her son that is kind of not listening to her anymore and is listening to words from other people, and it's also about the daughter who is kind of doing things on the side that Malorie is unaware of. And I thoroughly really enjoyed this book. Once again, as I said before, I really liked Bird Box, so I was very excited to jump back into the world of this dystopian novel, and I love the ending. I love the suspense of it, and I ended up giving this book a 4.4 out of 5 stars. It was not a perfect read for me, unfortunately, because I wanted maybe to include more monsters and include more action, but I guess this one focused a lot more on family relationships, which is fine by me. But anyways, that is it for all the horror novels slash thriller novels that I've read for Summerween, and this is the end of the video for when romance reader tries a horror genre. And I really enjoyed this, and hopefully I can pick up more horror novels and more thriller novels come October time. But until next time, I'll see you guys again. Bye.